Good afternoon. I want to thank you for having me, to the class, the Bond class who endowed the lecture. Thank you for having me. And to General for that wonderful introduction. I've been asked to come here and talk a little bit about my educational experience, my journey. So I think I'll do just that. And it's a really interesting time to be doing that. We live in quite interesting times. We have a woman who won the first time, a woman single artist, won Rap Album of the Year last night. Shout out to Cardi B, yeah, all right. See, we got some people here making money moves, all right. Childish Gambino, This Is America, with the Record of the Year and Song of the Year. And somehow our dear sister Jennifer Lopez did the Motown salute. Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel the same way. It's an interesting time to be alive and to think about the role of education. And one of the quotes that's always stuck with me, and I understand what it's like to be in high school, so I will try to keep this short. But one of the things that's always stuck with me is this quote by W.E.B. Du Bois. And for those of you who may or may not know, Du Bois is a pioneering and towering scholar in American history, one of the founders of sociology in America. And Du Bois has this wonderful quote that he says that education must not simply teach work, but that it must also teach life. Education cannot just be about training for a job or training for a particular occupation, but it must teach life. And for Du Bois, this quote had a couple different meanings. And he said that if we make money the object of training, we shall develop money makers, but not necessarily men. And I've taken the liberty there of adding women there. We had Brother Du Bois was a little behind on his notions of gender. If we make technical skill the object of education, we may possess artisans, but not in nature men and women. Men and women we shall have only as we make humanity the object of the work of the schools. Intelligence, broad sympathy, knowledge of the world, that was and is, and of the relation of men and women to it. This is the curriculum of that higher education which must underlie true life. For Du Bois, education is not just about getting a job. Education is about teaching life, what it means to be human, what it means to interact with people who are different than us. It means learning how to assess and understand your experiences. It means that education can't just be about how much money I'll make at the job I choose or what major I should have, but it's about teaching life. And I thought the best way for me to give an example of this is to talk a little bit about how I wrestled with this in my own life. And my family is in Toledo, Ohio, so they are far away from here, and I'm going to show some family photos. They would kill me if I showed these photos. They knew that I was showing these photos. So I ask that you not take pictures of these and tweet or anything like that, because somehow it could get back to Toledo, Ohio, and I'm the youngest of 5, and my older siblings will kill me if they knew I was showing these photos. So this is my grandparents. The guy on the right is my grandfather, John Martin. The woman on the left is my grandmother, Agnes Martin. I get my style from my grandfather. And they grew up in Griffin, Georgia, in the early 20th century. And they were members of the Great Migration. They came to the U.S., to the north, to Toledo, Ohio, in search of a better life. My grandfather had a 6th grade education. It was not an option for him to go to high school. There were no high schools for African Americans in Georgia at the time. And they came north with their children to try and find a better life. This is them. This is my family here. This is my grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt. And those two guys on the end, those are twins, Larry and Gary, very creative. One of them is my father, Larry, but I've asked him over the years which one he is, and he can't remember. So one of these guys is my father. That we know but for a fact. Which one, we're not sure, and he doesn't remember because they're identical twins, Larry and Gary. On the other side of my family is my other grandfather and my grandmother, James Cosper and Catherine Cosper. And my uncle James Cosper came up from York, Alabama during the Great Migration, similar reasons, seeking better opportunity, fleeing racial terrorism and lynching, and came to Toledo, Ohio to work. And he met my grandmother there in Toledo, Ohio, where she was from. And this is the family there. My grandfather died from a work-related accident at a very young age, but this is the family here. This is my grandmother here, and my mother is the one in the back with the big, beautiful smile. I am a mama's boy, I will confess. And that's my mother there in the back, Rose Martin. And this is my mom and dad. This is my family here. This is my mother and father, Rose and Larry Martin. And growing up there in Toledo, Ohio, they were always very concerned about me as their youngest child and how I would do in school and what the purpose of education was. My mother or father did not go to college. My father was drafted and went to Vietnam. My mother did not finish high school. And they were very concerned about their youngest son and what I would do in terms of my education. Now, for them, education was all about making sure I had a decent job. And this is me. Those of you who laughed, you are in trouble. Those of you who said, oh, he's so cute, if you come to WashU, I guarantee you'll get an A. I was born August 14th, Lerone Allen Martin, 8 pounds, and with a full head of hair. And my parents were very concerned with me as growing up because as I established a little bit of learning quickly from my older siblings, I learned a great deal from them. As you can see here, I was very somewhat dapper as a young man, I guess. Clearly with a lot on my mind at 5. And this is one of my earliest memories of school and of education. And I remember coming home and I remember saying something to the teacher that I think, I realized was a big deal because I came home and my parents were arguing about me. And the argument was apparently, and I don't recommend this, is that it was first grade. Why I was wearing a shirt and tie in first grade, I don't know. It was first grade, and I said to the school teacher, I was not paying attention, and she asked, why aren't you paying attention? And I told her, apparently, the legend is told, was that I was not paying attention because I found her to be boring. And I don't recommend it. And my parents were debating this and arguing. I remember, and my mother was saying, he can't go around telling people that they're boring. He can't do that. And my father said, in the way that only my father could, well, Rose, have you ever stopped and think maybe the boy is bored? He wears a shirt and tie to school. Maybe he's bored. And that's the moment when I remember very early on my mother coming to me, and I know that my mother meant well, but this is the dilemma my mother felt in raising a black child, and that was she wanted to protect me. And instead of taking the option of putting me in to an advanced program at my school, which they had, my mother chose to keep me in the class and just told me I didn't have to answer all the questions. Just do not be seen, to kind of hide myself and just get through school, and then I would get a good job. She told me not to assert myself because she was afraid, and not realizing that that was probably a sign that I probably should have been in an advanced class, at least a little more advanced than what I was doing. But she was afraid. She was afraid of how she was going to protect her young son. And that for my mother at the time, the education for my mother was simply just about me getting through school, not being seen, not getting in trouble, so that way I could get a decent job, as opposed to thinking about what my education would mean for my life. And that's not my mother's fault as much as it was just her own experience and being concerned about her child. So I remember early on thinking education was simply just about laying low, doing decent in school, enough to not to get in trouble. And as you see here, I tried to, with my sister here, who was always there in this photo, always protecting me, standing behind me. It's my older sister. And my older sister was the one that was always pushing me. And I'm so thankful for her to this day. My sister, she was 2 years older than me. She was the one that, when my parents were working, would wake me up in the morning to make sure I did my homework. She was the one that made sure I laid my clothes out, my shirt and tie, the night before school. She was the one that looked after me and took care of me. And she was always there for me. She was the one that worked really hard and studied and pushed me to do so as well, about what the meaning of an education really is. I tried to play sports, as you can see here with these shoulder pads that are 12 times too big for me. And this is my budding baseball career that ended and started on that same day. So I went through school for the most part, again, always not being pushed. I had teachers, unfortunately, who I think, and it was not purposeful, but I had teachers who engaged in what I've called and look back on my life in terms of sort of the soft and low expectations that oftentimes racism brings with it. And that I had teachers who recognized I had gifts, but they never really challenged me to do better, because they, I think, were content that I was just not causing trouble as a young African-American man, and never really calling me forward to do better than I was. This is senior year, high school, getting ready to go off to college. In college, I originally ran track. Any track runners in the room? I ran track. Shout out to the track runners. I ran the 400 in high school. Then I went off to college, I ran the 8. And it was in college where I had my first African-American teacher. His name was James W. Lewis. Shout out to Dr. Lewis. And Professor Lewis was the first time, I think, in college when I thought, I think I want to do this. I think I want to do what he's doing. I don't know exactly what I got to do to get there, but I know I want to do it. And that's, for me, I think, when this notion of education, for me, personally, when I realized about what education could mean, that it could mean about exploring life and questions in life, and questions that were pressing. And then it helped me to understand so much more of my youth. I started reading books. I started reading African American history for the first time. I started reading about my grandparents and the Great Migration, and all these things started coming forward. I really started realizing what it meant really to have an education. And it helped me to understand myself, and then of course it helped me to understand others. So when I got to college, I started making connections and understanding what real life meant. Then after that, I decided this is two of my sisters. I actually went to Divinity School. I went to Princeton Theological Seminary. I studied there. Was really beginning to think about what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to teach. I wasn't really quite sure where I wanted to teach. I went to Divinity School, studied faith, studied religion, studied history. And there's the first time that I encountered what really was a second awakening for me, is when I read for the first time in my life James Baldwin. Has anybody here ever read James Baldwin? I've read James Baldwin. Those of you who did not raise your hand, I commend it to you strongly. I commend to you to read The Fire Next Time, an outstanding book by James Baldwin. I read it for the first time in my master's program, and it changed my life because it was Baldwin who's wrestling with this idea of what it means to be young, to be male, and to be African American. And Baldwin also is wrestling with his own queerness as well, and what that really means. And for me, I remember where I was. Some of you will have this moment, or maybe you've already had this moment. When I read Baldwin for the first time, I was in the Frist Student Center at Princeton University. It's the first time I sat and read a book and just lost myself in it. And that was when I realized, we're reading Baldwin, James Baldwin, and we talked about love, what love means, and how to overcome racial trauma, how to overcome anger and hate, and how to love one's neighbor, and how to make sense of it all. That for me was a second awakening. Reading Baldwin just changed my life. And from there is when I decided I wanted to go on and do a PhD at Emory University. This is a photo that someone took of me that I thought looked pretty cool, so I put it in here. Hope you don't mind. And I got my PhD at Emory University. I focused on American history in the 20th century, the intersection of religion and politics. And from there, I ended up getting a job at Eden Theological Seminary and now at WashU. So that's been my educational journey. And I really, really thank a number of people in my life who helped me make sense of this, about what education really means. And education has to mean more for us today, especially in the world that we live in. It has to be more than just about how much money we're going to make or what type of job we're going to have. You all here have an outstanding mission. You all have an outstanding mission statement here that I love. That more than ever, our nation needs responsible men and women who can meet the challenges of this world with confidence and embrace all of its people with compassion. The next generation must include those who think critically and resolve to stand for what is good and right. That is such a powerful, beautiful mission. And you all really are, I know you hear this all the time, and I know you probably think it gets old, but you all really are the future. You all are going to be the ones to have to adjust and wrestle with the pressing issues that we see today. And your education is the place where you're going to do that. Right? Your education, which is about life, will teach you how to debate and argue with folks who you disagree with, but yet still be kind and have compassion. Because the generation before you, myself included, as we see in our politics on TV, right, they're not teaching you how to do this. You're not getting an example about how to disagree with someone and actually stick to the issue and not go to name calling, right? Actually stick to the issue, right? You all are going to learn how to do that. That's what your education is for. It is a laboratory for you all to cultivate these issues, cultivate these concerns, and cultivate these habits and virtues. To cultivate, right, what it means to be good, what it means to be right, what it means to debate, what it means to live in a better world, what it means to overcome some of the pressing things. This is where you will learn that America has really had done a great job of pushing this notion of progress. And America has overcome a number of things. But what we've seen in the last couple of years in this country, right, is that progress and change is not inevitable. Right? We cannot just sort of depend on things will get better just because of time, right? It's going to be up to you all to fix some of this. And I know that you hear this all the time, but I hope that you'll never forget, you're going to be the ones to help tackle these things. And you're learning how to do that now. So it's not just about memorizing dates in history and learning calculations and formulations in math and science, but you really are practicing and cultivating what it means to be a citizen and what it means to live in a world where you're cultivating virtues and resolving to stand for what is good and what is right. For me, the question that I have as someone who is a historian is, how do we all know? And as someone who is interested in questions of faith, how do we know what is good and what is right? You're going to be exposed to a number of people that will help you to think about that. You have been exposed. When you go off to college, when you go the next stage of your life, you're going to be reading about people who are going to tell you what is good and what is right. You're going to think with these folks, Kant, right? You're going to think with Niebuhr. You're going to think with all these theorists and philosophers. For me, one of the theorists and philosophers that I love to think with and through and argue with is Martin Luther King. And King has this wonderful quote about power and love and justice. And this is how King helps us to think about what is good and what is right. Today, I know a lot of you are seeing in our politics that it typically is about cultivating power, right? And King has something to say about that, right? People will hear that power is the thing that is what's right. King has something to say about that. King says, power without love is reckless and abusive. Right? So if you have power, you don't have love, you're in danger of being reckless and abusive. But he says, love without power is sentimental and anemic. In other words, if you have love but no power, right, it's sentimental, it's soft, it's anemic, it's weak. King says power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Right? Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. As you all wrestle with these things in high school, your adult life, I hope that Martin King will be one person that you'll think with and wrestle with, who will help you think through how do you cultivate and reckon with what is good and what is right. Martin Luther King is one place that I like to think with and think through. I think King is someone I commend to you to help you think through these things as well. So as I close, we come back to this quote about education must not simply teach work, but it must teach life. Again, this is about what education can do for us. It's not just about a subject matter. It's actually about teaching us about life, how to live together, how to debate, how to love, how to think. And Du Bois closes with and says, on this foundation, we can build bread-winning people, skill of hand and quickness of brain, with never a fear lest the child and man and woman mistake the means of living for the object of life. So Du Bois is saying, don't mistake money and success, the means of living, right, with the object of life. Those things aren't the object of life, right? Don't mistake those two. That's what Du Bois has for us. And I think that he's another person that I commend to you to help you think through these things as you wrestle with education, as you wrestle with what's facing our society today. I know I've taken up a number of your time, a good amount of your time. I've also was commended by one of your teachers that some of the latest scholarship is that you can hold students' attention on a PowerPoint for about 18 minutes. I'm a little over that. So with that, I'll stop and I'll take any questions or comments you may have. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that you'll